Love is in the air. What's up, guys? Today we'll be talking about Marnia Robinson's book, Cupid's Poisoned Arrow From Habits to Harmony in Sexual Relationships. Cupid's Venom. So, Robinson tells you all about humans' biological doom to fall in a disharmonious love trap. Interestingly, the assumed love expert is a former corporate lawyer who obtained degrees from Brown and Yale. But after personal experiences witnessing multiple of her friends divorce and experiencing a divorce of her own, she was drawn to investigate a remedy to heal intimate relationship disharmony. And voila, she was a sex author. Luckily, her husband is a human science teacher and a self-proclaimed neuroscience enthusiast who helps her to collect and analyze her data. The two have given TED Talks on how evolutionary biology affects intimate relationships. After analyzing mating and dating sciences and ancient sacred sex traditions, Robinson published Cupid's Poisoned Arrow in 2009. The book is applicable to anyone and everyone who has experienced or is fearful to experience the inevitable romantic lull in relationships that is emotional distance and alienation. It is also targeted at experts like psychologists, neuroscientists, evolutionary biologists, and anthropologists that have some of the puzzle pieces to understanding how couples who encounter this disharmonious tension in their relationships can cope, but that Robinson suggests doesn't solve the entire problem alone, respectively. So Robinson weaves together a picture of achievable relationship harmony by swapping between scientific studies, intricate information about neurochemistry, and teachings from ancient sages, and also anecdotes of her own experiences as well as the experiences of others. And the basis of her disharmony argument is not that the men are from Mars, women are from Venus mentality, but that humans as a whole are genetically wired to fall in love, experience exhilarating affection, bond over it, and then eventually grow annoyed or numb towards their partners. So the problem is that we are too much the same. One of the main concepts behind this is what Robinson calls the mating program. So basically, our DNA tells us to seek multiple mates to enhance our genes' chances of making it in the long haul. So monogamy is out, the more mates the better. But we can't help it. The urges, desires, drives, and attitudes we have for new and multiple mates and sexual satisfaction are the fault of our neurotransmitters, for one, so who can argue with dopamine? The bonding program, that's who. At least that's what Robinson suggests. This innate program was created in mammals as a way to bond infants to their respected caretakers. And it further evolved to make us fall in love long-term, or pair bond. And our ability as humans to form these pair bonds with others is one way we can walk in the direction of harmony versus compulsion. So actually bonding relationships instead of the unquenchable animal desire for reproduction. So because we are pair bonded mammals, we have both the urge to mate and the urge to bond. And we can consciously bypass our mating program by nurturing the emotional bonds with our loved ones. So dodge the arrow. Might sound corny, but even things as simple as giving your boo a hug or making eye contact with them while you're talking to them, it's a repetition of the small acts, and then it becomes automatic. And then you're setting you, your partner, and your future offspring, theoretically, you're setting them up with a built-in pleasure response, which is good. You're combating the negative, poisonous aspect of Cupid's arrow. So speaking of pleasure, what about sex itself? Robinson says that there are two types. One is the cause of Cupid's poison on relationships, and the other fights to defeat it. So the latter is orgasm or fertility sex. It's essentially the spike and eventual crash of neurotransmitters in the body, namely dopamine. So a spike in dopamine, which activates the reward center of the brain and gives the individual that high, causes the orgasm sensation. However, the levels then crash and the individual experiences the irritability, anxiousness, and eye-wandering greediness that is Cupid's poison. And no one likes to feel like this, so they're motivated to repeat the cycle in order to acquire that previous high feeling. According to Robinson, it can take the body 2 weeks to return to this normal, balanced state, but that's unbeknownst to the individual. They have no idea that they're unbalanced. So the cycle repeatedly runs its course, and Cupid's poison reigns. Our genes are smarter than we realize. They're looking out for us, milking as many fertilization opportunities as they can get, before we lose the desire to deviate from our one sexually exclusive partner. What we don't realize is this innate cycle isn't helping our relationships, which is where bonding-based sex comes in. In some, being conscious of this spike and then crash cycle, and refocusing one's intentions to giving sexual satisfaction to your partner rather than receiving it can balance your neurotransmitter levels. So it's more relaxed sex and it's more thoughtful and you don't spike and crash. Cupid's poison doesn't win. And apparently, with this type of sex, partners feel better. There's a sense of wholeness, healing, and etc. afterwards. And it's crazy to think, just reading this and all the information, that so many relationships go sour due to this subconscious cycle. Couples end up blaming each other, split up, and whatnot, and the causes are DNA. Robinson goes on to explain the phenomenon of Cupid's poison with more in-depth spiritual and scientific angles. So, for example, she includes information on the Cariza method, and in short, it's sex without orgasm as the end goal, focusing on the sexual unions of partners as a couple and then also as individuals. So it's about the transfer of energy between partners, and it leads to more sexual control and satisfaction, but it's not scientific, it's based on energy. It's more spiritual. So from a scientific perspective, Robinson further explains, for example, the working of our reward circuitries and what is happening chemically in our bodies when we feel we are in love. So all components combined, Cupid's poison arrow is an interesting and eye-opening look at human sexuality and assumptions about love and sex. So overall, while I was a bit skeptical of the book's message and content at first, just because there was such an array of information from personal anecdotes to spirituality to actual scientific research, much of the information was consistent with what I've learned about sexuality already. So one is what we just learned about David Buss's sexual strategies theory. So as we learned, women and men have evolved to have both short and long-term strategies. And Robinson points this out in her book as one reason that this happens is due to humans' evolution to acquire bonds, so relationships, rather than simply mate, so that innate desire to just reproduce. And this also reboots the idea that women have no or not as much interest in casual sex than men. And Robinson says the same thing in her book. She looks at an African tribe of hunters and gatherers, and the experts, it was anthropologists, were surprised to find that females were just as sexually promiscuous as males, and they predicted that males would be more. So for example, men want to have as much sex as possible for their genetic advancement, but women want the same. So congruent with Buss's theory, primitive males and females looked for different qualities in their mates, but of equal emphasis. So women sought out good-looking genes in males who could also provide for their offspring. And so it was like gene and resource shopping. Like the more males females slept with, the more chances of good offspring and the more resources they acquired. And on the other hand, males, congruent with what we learned, looked for one with signs of fertility and mother nurturing qualities. So while this tribe differed a bit from Buss's generalizations, the same concepts are at play. So that's just one example of coinciding scientific evidence, which Robinson includes a good portion of. And she explains the work of various anthropologists, psychologists, neuroscientists, and evolutionary biologists, like I mentioned before. And she also includes religious beliefs like Buddhism, among others, which fade a bit into her own beliefs because religion can't be scientifically proven. And she's also not an academic expert per se on the subject, so some of the discussion that she has in the book kind of also fades into her own opinions. So I would say that it's scientifically based, but also opinion based. Biases in the book. I would say that one bias she has is that all modern techniques aren't doing enough to cope with the relationship disharmony. They're not as effective. She references the ancient texts and religious practices that she deems current efforts as insufficient. But she's not really an expert herself, so it's a bias. And her use of personal experiences is also a bias because it compromises her ability to remain objective on the subject. However, she is quite knowledgeable of her content and she has sound information. So overall, I would recommend this book to others. It gives a broad perspective of humans as sexual beings. It can help people better understand themselves and others. However, one shoe does not fit all, and it's important to note that not all that is outlined in this text is applicable or even relevant to all individuals. So in other words, don't be overwhelmed by the information or overanalyze yourself or your partner. And watch out for Cupid's arrow.